This morning, I want to continue and conclude. There's something that is already brewing in my heart, and I was so tempted that this morning I'm going to already go to it, but I said, okay, let me complete what I've already started. I want to conclude the subject we started. We're talking about habits. Habits. You remember I asked around, I did some survey the other week when we were talking, and I said, what are habits? And you were able to really put a proper definition. We're going to go to the next slide, please, so that we can just quickly recap. So amongst other things, you would remember these words that comes up in the next few seconds, because they are ready, I know. We mentioned that when we talk about habits, we said habits are the strongest force to human being. You remember that, right? Okay, I'm sure they are in the notes somewhere. If they are not, you're more than welcome to take a shot. And by the way, this will also be made available to you. So habits are quite a serious thing. So secondly, we also mentioned that when we talk about habits, we are also, second slide please, we also said that good intentions and efforts, they can also be rendered null and void simply because of habits. If you don't believe me, just check yourself out today. Just not another day, just this morning when we finish church, and just check yourself, you realize that, okay, how did I pass there? How did I do this? You realize that there's a habit behind it. Thirdly, which is the second one, we then said how habits are formed. They are essentially formed by these three quadrants that you see. So quadrant number one is your knowledge, what you know, the what and the why too. You know, and then the second quadrant, which is the second one, is about desire and motivation, which is the want to. The willing to, the willingness to do whatever. Then the third quadrant, which is on your right, on my left, is the skill. In other words, the how to. So when all these things come together, you'll see that at the middle point there, never mind my little habits there, but it's quite big. Then you find that the combination, the culmination of all the knowledge and the desire and the skill, then a habit is formed. Are you with me? I'm taking a route of a trainer/teacher this morning, so that what I'm talking about, you are also able to go with. Let's go to the next slide, please. And then we went to talk about what is habit. We said it's derived from a Greek word ethos, which is better known to be customs or customs, depending on how you pronounce it. But all it says is about, tendency. And those of us who are fond of, some big words, we use words like propensity, and all those type of words. But the idea is that there's a regularness of whatever that is happening. Next slide, please. Then we also say, in other places, when they define what habit is, they also say it is being used to doing certain things. Used to. And so which then can also be interchangeably, we could use the word routine. In other words, doing without being aware or not staying or feeling, rather you feel at home whenever you are doing. Then we also said that it is also an established pattern of behavior. The way you go about. Then we also said, fifthly, if you ask a small child and you say, what is a habit? He or she is likely to say to you, I do this thing, I want to stop, but I can't. So this summarizes what we did last week, the second slide. And then we also said that a good 90% of what we do is then governed by habits. All right? So in other words, you might be thinking to yourself, you are ahead of me now. So you might be thinking that you are thinking, but in actual fact, what you are actually doing at that particular moment, it's a byproduct of where you have been dwelling for the longest time. All right? Are you with me? I'm just summarizing, ladies and gentlemen. This is nothing new. Okay? The next one, we then said, we quoted a scripture, the book of Proverbs, which is basically Proverbs chapter 23, verse number 7, it says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Then we said, the word heart there, it is the word nefesh in Hebrew, which basically communicate the idea of a subconscious mind. In other words, this thing gets stored into the subconscious mind so that it can be able to, what is the right word? So that you can be able to juggle other things without necessarily having to go back to it all the time. So 90% of what you actually do, it is basically as a product of a habitual construction. Are you with me? Yes. Okay. So this is what we covered. So the next one. And then what did we then say? We say that a habit can be a very good master, a faithful, useful, servant, so to say. But it can be a very cruel master, especially on destructive habits. Are you with me? All right. So today then, I want us then to go to the next part, which I would like us to look at. You're going to park it there for now. Romans chapter number 7, we are reading 15 and 19, so that we can concretize whatever that we have covered so far before we carry on. We are reading in the Amplified Classic, Romans chapter number 7. We're reading from verse 15 to verse number 19. Are you there? If you are not yet there, say wait. Talk to me. All right, so it says in Amplified, for I do not understand my own actions. I am baffled, bewildered. I do not practice or accomplish what I wish, but I do the very thing that I loathe, which my moral instinct condemns. Now, I do habitually what is contrary to my desire. That means that I acknowledge and agree that the law is good, morally excellent, and that I take sides with it. However, it is no longer I who do the deed, but the sin principle which is at home in me and has possession of me. Verse number 18. For I know that nothing good dwells within me, that is, in my flesh. I can will what is right, but I cannot perform it. I have the intention and urge to do what is right, but no power to carry it out. Verse number 19. For I fail to practice the good deeds I desire to do, but the evil deeds that I do not desire to do are what I am ever going. That's the Bible, right? So what is Paul telling us here? Simple stated, Paul is saying the good things that I always tell myself that I want to do, I find myself doing the opposite. So that is to suggest that habits are quite strong, that it does not matter. We might be reciting this declaration of, transformative leadership, and only to find that because your mind has not really wrap its mind around this, you find yourself untransformed. Because speaking about something does not necessarily mean that you're doing it. That's what Paul was saying. So that is a dilemma. Now, let's then go to the 3 key things to learn about habits. 3 key things to learn about habits. Number 1, habits do not hide. Habits do not hide. You know, you may be this type of person that do certain things at a very secluded place, private and whatever the case may be. But bear in mind that, and this is very, very important, especially to the parents, that do realize that the decision that you may take privately might have a public consequence. Maybe I spoke that one too fast. I'm saying no matter how private is the decision, especially if you are parenting or a family person, bear in mind that some of those decisions that you are taking at the moment, nobody knows, nobody can see, but one of these days it will have a public consequence. So very, very important. What is really the morality or the rationality behind it is because every time when certain things are done over and over again, as we have spoken, sooner or later, you're going to have to come to the public platform and begin to act in consistence with what you've been doing. Okay, so point number 2 on 3 things to learn about habits is that habit Rather, habits decide your response to challenge of life. Habits decide. So simple stated, whenever you are faced with a crisis in life, I think it was on Thursday, when did Nwabisa share? I can't remember. During the course of the week when we were praying, she read a verse to say, paraphrasing, I think it's Proverbs chapter 24, which says that if you are not strong, you're going to break under pressure. You remember the verse? Yeah, so what that means is that, you know what, when pressure comes into your life, it has a way of challenging that which is lying on the repository or in the inner core of you. That is why you find that people essentially, in the past, it used to be three ways people will respond to any challenge, but there's a fourth one that has been introduced. When pressure comes, some of us, we tend to freeze. Are you with me? You tend to freeze. You find in yourself where you feel like, you are immobilized. There's nothing you can do about it. Secondly, if you are not freezing, other people, they fight. They put up a good fight. What is really happening there? It is simply because there's a construction of habits or the way you have been doing things consistently, which then comes up at a day when you're under pressure. So there's a freezing, there's a fighting. But there are also those who also fly, what we call flight, because of pressure. In other words, they would rather leave the scene or leave the place where things are happening or aiming that they would come at a later stage. Worse off, there are also those who do not just fly or go away, but they also bury their heads in the sand, hoping the challenge will change, or rather the challenge will pass by itself. Fourthly, we also learned that if some of them, they are not fighting, they are not freezing, they are not flying, they also flow. Are you with me? So you cannot be just in between. There is a particular predisposition or habitual construct that you always put up whenever you find yourself under challenge. Number 3, habits determines the outcome of your life. Right. So this is very important that I need to really mention this. And I know I'm talking in the context of believers and people are saying, but where is then my faith? If habits is dictating this, faith then comes in to be able to then obliterate or rather to change the trajectory. That is why the Bible then says that, there are new mercies of the Lord every morning. So in other words, God gives you every single morning or every day for you to be able to develop what we call neural pathways. Somebody talk to me this morning. Neural pathways. What are neural pathways? Neural pathways is like a beaten path. The more you walk on it, the more it becomes better and you become familiar. So if I'm going to be walking on just a narrow road like this one here, it might be a bit challenging, but the more I walk on it, the more it sort of graduates from becoming just a path. Then it becomes a road. It becomes a national road. It becomes a major road. Therefore, it becomes an N4 inside the house. Am I speaking something that people that are grabbing? So which then explains why certain things were very quick for you to do. It's simply because now the path has beaten so often. It's an N4. On the N4 you cruise. Oh goodness. So let's then ask this particular important question. So what are the things that feeds the habits? What are things that feed the habit then? Because habits are fed. They grow. They don't start big. Like the example I've given here, it's going to be like a pathway, really, more than anything else. Before you know it, when you come back the next time, it's no longer just a pathway. Then it becomes broader. It becomes 4 lanes. It becomes 8 lanes, and so on and so forth. Where did it all started? It started with a small pathway. But what feeds it then? So what feeds our habits, or any habit for that matter, it's repeated actions. Repeated actions. So the more you repeat something, the more it becomes then familiar to you. So therefore, I want to suggest or submit to this particular assembly this morning that if you want to really then develop, something that will be able to help you to grow as a believer, repeat the practice of reading the word even when you don't feel like reading it. Because then what automatically happens, I'm using the word automatically quite carefully here, because nothing happens automatically until you introduce the system of automation. Oh, goodness. I hope I can speak, language that people will be able to, find here. Because I know sometimes we are very quick to say, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. But you find that the things you are looking for, some of those things, we lose them simply because we do not have the enough courage and capacity that will be able to take us to the next level. So therefore, what I'm submitting is that repeat the action. Repeat the action. Whether the action is that I want to be a person that is prayerful. And prayerfulness, it's not equivalent to speaking too much. I was looking for a better word. I couldn't be modest there. So if I'm saying I'm so prayerful, that is not equivalent to being prayerful. Being prayerful means to be prayerful. In other words, to do the deed, to do the action. Because sometimes we could find ourselves speaking so much qualitatively. But when we now go and take now the statistics that is supposed to be going according to the match, you find that there's little. Are you hearing me? I'm really dealing with the behind the scenes, because these then give us a precursor, specifically this message of habits. It gives us a precursor into the place of habitation. That's what I'm going to be talking about next week and the other weeks. Habitation. Habits are very important. So number one, I said 4 things that feed habits. Number 1, it's repeated action. Number 2, familiar setting. Familiar setting. In other words, there's always a specific place, a specific spot, and a specific, scenery, specific atmosphere that is conducive for certain things to thrive. For an example, you find that, you're always finding yourself at a place where you cannot be able to participate in the fasting simply because the atmosphere that has been created into your surrounding and into your life, there's always food around you. So every time when they talk about food, you are thinking, hey, who's going to eat all this food if I don't participate in it? But ladies and gentlemen, how many of us know that when you are now in the kingdom, there comes a time where you could be able to say to certain things, this time around, it's about spiritual development that I want to do. The food, I'm going to still come back to it. Familiar settings. Another example. The other example is that some people have found themselves over and over again tripping over certain temptation simply because they always dwell in a certain place. And I'm not suggesting that sell your house. I'm not suggesting that sell your car. But I'm just suggesting this morning that there comes a time that the mind must be able to relocate from certain place because it's not helpful. Some of us would like to, progress into our lives to become what we are supposed to be. But you cannot be able to progress to become the person you are if you are still trapped. That, when you are a 12-year-old boy, 12-year-old girl, that certain words were spoken to you. That even though today you are 40 years old, you always go back to the 12-year-old. There's a habit that has been formed over a period of time. Familiar setting. Number 3, routine practices. So what is the difference between routine practices and By the time we talk about action, sometimes it could be just a one singular isolated case. By the time we get to the routine, here we are talking about something that you even do with your eyes closed. So all those things are feeding into their habits. Lastly, you'll need what we call reinforcing culture. So there must be something that helps you to be able to say, you know what, this is this. So a good example is this. You find that certain people, the way they go about, doing certain things is because there's somebody who's always sharing them. So watch this. Watch this. And I want to say this. I want to take a bit of a breath to say this. Not every person that is cheering you or praising you that you have to believe. So in other words, I'm simply saying the following. Take praise and cheer with a pinch of salt. This is a very difficult, to put across. But I'm going to give you an example. When Judas is sitting with the disciples, it's the Last Supper. He says to the woman who came, broke the alabaster box. And there was a grumbling amongst the people to say, but you know what, this is a waste. Guys, we could have really raised a lot of money here. Why are we wasting this particular perfume? The issue there is not because Judas was all about the ministry of Jesus. Already by that time, something else has come in. So if everything that was said by Judas at that particular time, taken for what it is, guess what was going to happen? Would have been derailed from the course of the kingdom. So I'm simply saying, I don't know who's sharing you, and I'm not trying to say that be judgmental, but I'm just trying to bring this particular sensitive point home. Be discernful. Be discernful. Because there's a reinforcing culture, that goes on there. So how powerful or forceful are habits? Three things I wanna put across. How powerful are habits? Habits overrules reason and logic. Habits overrules reason and logic. So there are times where you might be thinking to yourself, you have rationalized everything, you have mapped out the way this is how things are gonna go. When certain things happen, if you have not really gone there often and regularly, you will find that even the reason might be thrown out of the window. Typical example. How many of us do visit doctors from time to time? I want to speak good about doctors. I see Orientis looking at me. We visit doctors, right? In fact, maybe the majority of us. You find a doctor who says, Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so, this pattern of yours, I'm talking about people that are not necessarily here, other people. This particular pattern of yours, of taking so much of whatever, it's not very good. Therefore, cut this, cut that, cut this. This is a very good advice, medically or clinically. Now, the funny thing is the following. The same doctor, let's say maybe the suggestion was to do with smoking. I'm giving an example. Was to say, cut this smoking because it's not good for you. And we are not even talking about being a Christian, but we are just talking on the basis of health-wise, right? The same doctor who had given you that morally right, morally sound advice, you find that he is smoking. And you ask yourself, what are we dealing with here? What is the problem? You find that because this particular habit of smoking has become so ingrained in him that he rather give advices to other people, but yet he does not live with the same advice. So he rather lose his own life simply because I always say the following. Other people might agree or disagree. When a person is really smoking, I'm talking about whatever smoking, It's simply because the person cannot breathe on by himself. He needs an external assistance for him to be able to breathe. It's just that the way he has gone about developing this particular pattern, it has now become so part of him. Therefore, he depends on the leaves for him to be able to help him to breathe. Or whatever substance for that matter. Because you know what, I remember vividly, I used to work with a colleague. It would be a raining season like this, cold sometimes. And the guy is standing outside, he will just squeeze in some kind of a corner so that he can be able to take that one smoke. And it's cold. You can see that he's experiencing and feeling the cold. And I'm saying, why the torture? And I know I'm using a very extreme example here, but I'm just simply bringing this particular point home. That could it be that there are certain things that always put you in a tight corner, and you know for a fact that these things are not supposed to be part and parcel of my spiritual development or part of where I'm supposed to be going, but simply because you have allowed this to be so ingrained in me, you cannot do otherwise. But I'll come this morning to say that there's a God in heaven, that when you go to him and you say, Lord, I am done with this. I'm done with this particular lifestyle. May you change. And God is not going to just, what is the right word? It's not going to just throw the package there and says, sort yourself out. You need to partner with him. Because in any case, God was not there when you formed this particular, this habit. By there I mean that you do it out of your own willingness. Going back to my previous slide about the quadrants. So, habits nullifies intentions. I think we have talked about it in one of the slides before. So much so that if intentions are just going to be something that remains in our heads and we don't translate them, that is why I encourage that if you're going to do anything significant, be a person who gets into the habit of writing things down. Write your plan down. Write the things that you want to achieve down. Because what we write confronts us. Are you with me? So some people have not necessarily been able to achieve certain things simply because certain habits or certain things that we want to really achieve into our lives have not been confined into writing. Why do you think God is an almighty? He could have easily just written the Bible into our hearts and says, bazobona phambili. No, what he decided was to say this particular Bible, of course with the help of people and so on, the Bible had to be written so that you can be able to read it. And once you read, it's no longer just an information, but it becomes translated and becomes personal. Are you with me? Now somebody says, when we write down things and ideas, the ideas disentangle themselves and start to make more sense. Which is why I also encourage that when we come to church, when I'm preaching like this, because what I'm preaching here, when you go elsewhere in certain seminars and workshops, you name them, you find that they will teach you and they said, now that we have given you this particular position, we want you to go to an emotional intelligence course. And you're thinking, okay, so what am I going to learn there? So part of the things that you're going to learn are some of the things I'm touching here. So I'm simply saying the church environment happens to be the greatest that has really, shaped and helped us to be able to be better people and better leaders. Last one. How powerful or forceful are habits? Habit enslaves. Habits enslaves. Habits enslaves. So you find that the issue is not that you don't have money. The issue is not that you are broke. But the problem is that the spending habits have become such that whatever that comes in, without you even sitting down and say, let's have a caucus. Now that we have got 10 million in the bank, let's first decide Where are we going to be spending money? Which is why you find that a person may be, oh goodness, Joseph used him so profoundly as a strategist, because when he revealed and started to demystify the dream by the king, he then basically painted a picture to say that there will be 7 years of plenty. And 7 years will also be followed by, a 7 years of famine. But what is important is that when you should be able to think about investment and savings. And it's not only relating to money alone, but bearing in mind that there will come a time that when you are not going to be having plenty all the time. But Hebes does this because you did not take care of those at a time when you lost everything. In other words, everything was just about outflow all the time. Are you with me? All right. So 6 habitual keystones or centers. I'm just going to be rushing here so that I can conclude. So a keystone number 1, it's what we call spiritual habit, which is very, very important. So what happens here? In the spiritual habit center, this is where prayer happens. This is where reading, this is where developmental of your spirituality happens. Because if this particular center is not taken care of, you will find yourself having been saved for 10, 20 years, but you find that the duration of your being saved versus, the development into your spirit, the two do not match. I want to ask you a very simple question. As a believer, as a child of God, who's walking with God, who's desiring greater things, what are you doing to develop yourself? Now, this may sound a little bit like a criticism, but it's not, because I'm contextualizing things. If you're only going to be dependent to hear the message on Sunday, and Monday until Saturday, there's nothing happening, I'm afraid that growth is going to be stagnated. We preach good word here. And I'm not saying this to blow a trumpet on ourselves, but I'm just saying, we have been cooked and we have been groomed from good hands, where we were taught that we don't preach nothing else but God's word. But good as it may be, the idea is that you should be able to find something that sustains you. Amongst other things, that's why we have created so many platforms for this message to be available, for other books. And when I preach from time to time, you will hear me making referrals to other materials. Why? So that you can be able to expand your horizon. When you do not know, you can never rise up to the knowledge that you have never been. For you to do better, when you know better, you are able to do better. Are you hearing me? That's the spiritual habit. Family habits determines how we build our homes, love and spouses, relationship. And also specifically, this also talks to how do we mete out discipline. It could be, to kids and so on and so forth. All those things are as a result of habit. And I give you a good example. You find that because you grew up in an environment where if a person makes a mistake, the logical thing that happens, without you even thinking about it, you find that you want to shout at the person. And you ask yourself, why did I really shout? Was it really necessary for me to shout? Couldn't I have really spared my voice, Orient, so that when I sing on Sunday, it's restored? It's simply because there's a habit that you have seen. And you see, habits are very interesting because some of them, we acquire them silently as we are observing those who are around us. So that is why family habits are important. So we've got relational habits, we've got financial habits, we've got health habits, we've got work habits. So I just want to ask you this last question as I'm concluding here. What kind of habits do you see in your own life that you want to really change? I'm going to give some example of some habits as I'm concluding before we can partake in the communion. Some examples of habits include, not only this one, it's the habit of laziness. Laziness is a habit. Okay, let me define what laziness is. Laziness is a habit, it's a tendency of always wanting to rest before you work. That's what it is. You just feel, you might even modernize it a bit and say, it's sluggish. I feel just sluggish. In a good English, they will say that's that. But what it is at the bottom of it is really laziness. So there's also a habit of foul language, insultive language. You always feel like it's just at the tip of your tongue. You also find that gossiping is a big habit. And let me say this. All the habits I'm referring to here, or habits in general, they don't start big. You remember the neural pathway that I talked about? They start very small. We are just talking about him or her. But if you're talking about, why don't you go to him or her? If there's something that you need him to change in that particular area. There's also a habit, we talk about in our days, there's a habit of, exposing yourself to pornographic material, masturbations, and all those type of, sexual perversion. Those are habits that start small. And they start small simply because you are not even mindful of how you are spending your time. And I want to suggest the following, that, if there's a place the habits or sin always want to really thrive in, it's places that are not always marked or regulated. We are living in times where smartphones, they are good, they are smart, right? But when you go into the social media, because they are trying to push a certain agenda, there are certain algorithm that they always push it, whether you like it or not. So it's entirely upon you to be able to come to the place where you'll say to yourself, I'm going to be choosing to be the person that God wants me to be. I'm done. So I just want us, as we're going to be going into the communion this morning, partaking from the communion, it's not a panacea, it's not a panado, right? You don't eat communion and hope that all my problems are going to be solved once and for all. The reason why we do this, the Bible says in the book of Luke chapter number 22, Jesus said that, do this in remembrance of me. We are not remembering anyone else but Jesus. So this morning, when you receive your communion, please stand with me this morning. I want you to remember or bear in mind that, we are in a kingdom that the Bible says that we should do this in remembrance of him. What are we remembering? Why do we need to remember? We need to remember because what he did, he demonstrated the conquering that is unprecedented. Are you with me this morning? So, in light of the fact that now we are in a season where we've been talking about habits, and I said, if you remember, I said the whole crux of what we are talking about is because we wanted to make it a point that all the consolidated gains, the things that you have acquired over the years, you must come to the realization that they can be kept. You can be able to keep, that anointing that God has given to you. You can be able to keep, that righteousness that God has given to you simply because you are building a habit that always go to the Lord and say, Lord, if I do not understand, I will inquire from you.